All right. Okay, now recording. Bueno. All right. Now,
By
please
the way,
remember, yes.
batindi
No.
ifanding if recording.
Okay, so I have not warmed up whatsoever, and the script, there is no script. I literally wrote this an hour ago. Hello, everybody. What is up? It is Stan the Man, and welcome back to another Stan the Man podcast. How are you guys doing today? I hope you guys are doing pretty well. It is Saturday, 8th of July, 2000, and goddamn 20, the year that keeps on giving. And in this podcast, we actually have a very special guest, Ernieson, my brother. But before we get into that, let's move on to some local news. Local cases on Aruba have risen by more than 200 in less than 3 days. I can't say I told you so. I fucking hate being right all the time. The government is asking anyone who has been in the following establishments in the last 3 weeks to self isolate and call your doctors immediately. The establishments are as follows. That wasn't correct, but fuck it. Gusto's nightclub, Muscle and Lungs Fitness and Craft Restaurant. Okay, effective immediately, all bars will be closed until further notice. It is not yet required, but it is recommended to wear a face mask where social distancing is not possible, like supermarkets, office spaces, etc., etc. Wear your
Hope
mask,
that
folks. It's
ten
getting. Sorry.
hope those $10 drinks were worth it though.
Mama, ya tu sabes, man. International news. The Dutch government is issuing a smog warning for next week as four provinces are in code orange for the current heat wave. To all my buddies out there in the Netherlands, protests in Lebanon continue. Even after 4 days after the blast in Beirut, the people are expressing their anger at their political leaders. Now let's move on to the rest of the podcast. As I mentioned before, here is, well, a very special guest, my brother, Ernieson. You want to introduce yourself, buddy?
Hey everyone, my name is Ernieson. I currently live in the Netherlands in Maastricht. I have a background in biology and health and a master's in health education and promotion. Um, I specialize in data analysis, statistics, human health, behavior change, and at the moment I'm working as an account analyst at MedPace. Thanks for having me, Stan.
Hey man, we've been trying to get this. Oh man, we've been trying to do this for a fucking while. At first, my laptop wouldn't work. Then I had to move. In case you're wondering why it sounds like echoey and really bad compared to like other podcasts, I'm literally sitting down on the floor in front of my iPad, like reading stuff out.
And
Okay.
because you're an asocial imbecile,
Oh yeah,
selectively.
that's all day, my dude. That's how I survive. All right. So how have things been going over there in the Netherlands, especially now with the coronavirus? Things that you had to get used to, minor inconveniences to major changes. You've been getting along pretty well.
I think it depends primarily on who you ask. Typically, the changes have been okay. I mean, with the exception of the drastic smart lockdown that they started back in March. You can't really expect anything else given that the trend keeps showing that the virus is here to stay. When we become lax and when we start to think, oh, this is fine, we can go ahead and about a business just as we did before, the numbers show that it's making a strong comeback. So there's really, I can't stress this enough, there is really cause for concern, and we really have to realize that we have to do this together and to follow the proper guidelines set in place by the government. Otherwise, this is going to get worse and worse. And it's not only going to get worse, but I believe it's going to get the bad type of worse that you can't easily fix. Let's say, for example, now. If we were to get another spike in cases and another spike here in the Netherlands, even in hospital patients because they're all infected with corona. And if combined with that some random natural disaster happens, we would be screwed, to put it bluntly. So I think that it's okay to be concerned because it is a concern. I'm not per se on board mass panic. On the other hand, I do think it's better to be safe than sorry because the issue is that the numbers show that most people that have this here in the Netherlands or that have gotten it recently were infected at home. That means at family parties and other gatherings. So you wouldn't exactly expect that these places will be a cluster to get the virus. You probably expect, oh, if I go outside or if I go to parties and stuff like that, to restaurants, you get infected. But no, it's actually most of the case, most of the new cases, most of the new infections occurred at home. So that is cause for concern, and I really think that we should start taking it more seriously.
Mhm.
We had a press conference again. I think it was Thursday. Yeah, I think it was Thursday. A press conference in over a month, wherein Prime Minister Mark Rutte stressed that yeah, this is we don't want to cause another lockdown. We want to avoid that, so we
Yeah,
have to start taking these measures seriously.
yeah.
And I can only implore anybody who's listening, everybody in the world, anybody out there, to please just use your common sense. Please do not take any unnecessary risks, and don't think about yourself. Think about others, because that's the primary issue with COVID-19. You may not necessarily get sick, or you won't get that sick, but other people can get extremely sick, and
Mm.
that's not only an issue for those infected, but it also puts a huge unnecessary amount of stress on the healthcare system, because it's not something that you can cure overnight.
No, no, you're right over there, man. Especially like here, things are okay. I wouldn't say they're out of control, but they're definitely heading in that direction. I mean, 200 cases in less than 3 days. So far, none of them have turned severe. But remember, we don't exactly have enough room at the hospital to treat anybody. And what kind of plan does the government have next for it? Okay, are they going to set up field hospitals in case it gets worse? Gets worse? Are they going to hammer down like last time? Because even though it was pretty heavy-handed, you can't exactly deny the fact that the lockdown and the curfew, it actually worked. It flattened the curve a bit. Not just to mention, a lot of people were too scared to leave their own homes,
No,
and
it
like you just
definitely had an effect.
yeah, it definitely had a fucking effect. Now, especially now, what I noticed, okay, people uh here we say, okay, na vida mucho contento, right? What do I mean by that? Is I genuinely believe, since, they finally flattened the curve, they started getting cocky. They started getting more lax. They started relaxing the rules a little bit too damn much too quickly. Most people started taking the well, how can I say that most people started taking the severity of this pandemic lightly. And what ended up happening is, even with all the rules in place, with the tourists coming in, with the tourists coming in and out, somebody, like I predicted, somebody, somewhere, somehow, someday will fuck up. And since this virus does not show symptoms, and some people might have the virus and be completely asymptomatic while they're still infected, during the period they're still infected, they can infect many more people without them realizing. So let's say somebody at the airport, okay, they got the virus, but they're not showing any symptoms. They go home to their families, boom, automatically the family gets infected. The child wants to go hang out with his friends. Boom, his friends get infected. The mother goes to her gal pals. Boom, they get infected, and so forth and so forth and so forth.
Yeah, so everybody can cause a chain reaction.
Mm. Now, there's also this is like most people, a lot of people my age, like you go on Facebook a lot. Like I go on Facebook a lot. A lot of people I'm seeing like a very over exaggerated hatred of 2020. Like, what do I mean by this? Okay, there have been far worse years than this one. Yes, we have the pandemic. Yes, there was the explosion at Lebanon. Yes, we nearly saw a third goddamn world war. But people seem to forget that humanity, as of the 21st century, we are literally in one of the most prosperous states in human history. We just since the invention of media, internet, and stuff like that, just a lot more of the bad news gets exposed to us. Okay, we're shown the bad news because bad news gets more views. That's it. Like, how do they call them, like, doomers and stuff like that? That's what do you think about all that shit?
Well, I don't think it's necessarily the a case of doomers. I just think that it's easier for people to hold on to something negative than focus on something positive, because
Hmm.
negatives are typically more absolute, in my opinion and in my experience, whereas a positive, you still have a sense of mystery and unknown to it, because a negative is typically something that has happened in the past that has already been solidified, but a positive, that's something that is distal in the future and thus unknown, meaning that that there's always going to be a sense of dread attached to it because you want to stay positive, but at the same time, your instincts tell you that it's something that has not yet happened. So how can you prepare for it? How will you be prepared for it? So I think what you said is definitely true. The media is definitely something it has a force to be reckoned with, and not only that, but it's also a powerful tool that people use to reach their specific goals. And in this case, with the whole negative and positive, I I mean, yeah, there's no shortage of salty and dark memes out there. I mean, everybody does their thing, of course, but uh, it's. I always try to say it's easy to be a critic. It's very easy to be a critic. It's very easy to be negative because you can say anything. You can argue with someone that the sky isn't blue. It's light blue shade SP15-A1 or whatever. So it's very easy to take that stance. Whereas it's not so easy to be positive because it relies on many unknowns. So that's my take on it. And I'd say to everybody out there who's overly negative, I mean, if you really are that negative, try to reflect on yourself, with yourself, and on your own what you can do to make that change. A lot of changes needed in the world. A lot of positivity comes from the self, and you can't expect everybody to be positive all the time, of course, because
Yeah,
but hey,
exactly.
that's life. But I
Hmm.
mean, being overly negative, that it's scientifically been proven that being negative or having a very negative mindset decreases your quality of life across a variety of
There
fields.
it is. Yeah,
So I definitely don't recommend taking that road because it's a long and hard road to travel on, and one not
exactly.
easily and one that you can't easily get off of.
Hmm. Like, okay, I always try. Okay, I always try to see the more realistic side of things. Okay, now
That is true,
realist.
and
Yeah,
and that
realistically
being said,
speaking.
yeah, that being said, a lot of people tend to confuse reality with can be realistic, but there's a huge difference in being realistic,
Hmm.
negative.
Like when I told people like 3 or 4 weeks ago, when I told people that there will be another spike in cases and we might reach 500 within a month, they're gonna call me amarga. They're gonna say I'm kind of an asshole, and sure, I might be an asshole to say that type of stuff without taking people's feelings into consideration. But flash forward 3 4 weeks later, look what the
To
hell
be
happened.
honest, I think
It's just
that's more related to denial, though.
there it
It's
is.
more of an issue of denial than an issue of being negative per se. Like predicting that at some point in the near future there will be an event that causes mass murder, some kind of
Yeah,
attack
exactly.
or whatever. That there's a high likelihood of that happening. It probably will
Yeah,
happen. So in that sense, what you predicted is something that, taking everything into consideration, would have happened.
I could have been completely wrong. It was just a prediction based off of observation on current events and events that happened before. Like especially like you lived here, you know how the people here tend to behave, right? Live for today, fuck whatever happens tomorrow, despite the consequences. And now we are suffering from the consequences of that type of attitude.
Don't really use the full capabilities of the brain cells they were born with, which is a
Most of them have
shame
died. Most of them have died off from Palmyra.
because which is that I think that's a tremendous shame because yeah, you as a species we have an incredible gift to use our cognitive capability, everything we've achieved in the last 150 years alone. I don't think evolution would have ever prepared us for that in any scenario
Yep.
whatsoever in the entire multiverse. So with that in mind, I do think that the mindset did not help. However, I mean, it's, as I said earlier, it's very easy to be a critic. It's extremely easy to be a critic, and these days, there is no shortage of cum laude alumni of Facebook University. So it's even
Yep.
more. It's even easier. It's even more easy. It's easier than ever to be a critic, and all you need is an internet connection and a smartphone.
Yep.
So
Exactly.
with respect to that, I don't think the approach that we're that the Rubens are taking right now is exactly adequate. I've seen a lot of hate directed towards the government.
Hmm.
Would do I agree with everything, with every policy that they've put in place to mitigate the spread? No, not exactly. But given the choice, I do think that, taking into consideration that Aruba was running on fumes, there is literally no income without tourism.
Yep.
I do think that, given the shitty hand that they were dealt, that the government did the best that it could at that time.
Especially. Yep.
That being said, at that time is something that is to be considered very relative these days, especially because the virus, the trend with the pandemic can change on a weekly basis. So it's extremely difficult to plan and or prepare for anything where you're gonna likely have changes in a couple of days anyway.
Mm.
And people still don't seem to understand that. If you just take a look at photos being shared on social media or on news outlets, you can see that most people don't even know how to properly wear their mouth caps, which is a shame.
Yep.
Um, just good hygiene in general. I'd recommend everybody to do this once in a while, but be warned, you will become extremely paranoid whenever you're sitting anywhere, be it at your desk, at work, or in a restaurant, or in the train. Just look around you and be aware of how many times people touch their faces after just touching dirty surfaces and just not being hygienic in general. So it's extremely difficult to 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 expect people to get that right all the time, especially when they're very hesitant or when they're very stubborn to learn, because it's you can't deny that it's been a huge shift. And
Oh yeah,
um, I
definitely.
I don't look. I'm not. I mean, I can say this without any shame, that I don't consider myself weak-minded, in the sense that I understood immediately what was needed of me, or how I needed to do my part, and by distancing myself so socially. That being said, I could handle it in the sense that I could also keep myself busy. I had a job where I could work from home,
Yeah.
but take into consideration, many people do not or did not have that luxury. Let's call it luxury for the sake of this argument.
Yeah.
And consequently, the coping mechanisms that you're gonna get are not the healthiest. I'm not saying that we need to use that as an excuse, but I am saying that it is cause for concern, because it indicates that the root of the problem lies deeper and somewhere else.
Mm. Yeah, like the psychology of just being isolated for a lot of people. Many people
Yeah,
that.
it's scary because we are, as a species, we are very social. We're
Yep.
extremely dependent on social connections.
Yeah, exactly.
It's
But people seem to like realize that a lot of social connections, okay, as human beings, as species, okay, our bands rarely numbered more than 150 people. Like afterwards it becomes very difficult in order to keep ties with our fellow sapiens, you would say, okay? Things start getting distorted. But then you go on to social media, you have like over 300, 500, maybe even 600 friends or followers. Most of them you don't know, most of them you haven't even met in your damn life.
I'd
But
use the
people,
term friends very cautiously, because what is considered a friend? Friend, do you consider it someone you know, someone whose face you know, which name is attached to? What
exactly.
do you consider a friend? I mean, it's I'm all about making connections, but if it's not going to make any sense to make connections if those are empty connections.
Thank you. And that's the way to go for it. And that's the way to actually look at things. But people focus more on followers and stuff like that. They think, okay, if I post this, and a lot of people like that. They've never met that person. They've never had an interaction with them. They think that they are right in some sense of the way, or they're thinking, oh, I must be like really popular. While they go outside, they have no real way of socially interacting with people. But what I'm trying to get at, especially now with a lot of people, they are staying inside. Okay, they go on the internet a lot more, especially people over the age of like 40 to 50 who don't really know that much about the internet. They go down this rabbit hole and come up with they go into Facebook or like fucking Google an idiot, and they come out thinking they're a goddamn genius, like they discovered the code of the world or some shit.
Yeah, I do see that that has become an issue, especially now with the pandemic. Literally, not to quote Trump or anything, but fake news is rampant.
Mm-hmm.
My recommendation to anybody would be just to please follow the guidelines established by official government websites and sources. Like here in the Netherlands, you have the RIVM. In Aruba, you have the Dienstwachtgezondheid. Yeah,
Yep.
those people aren't pulling that information out of their ass. So
Yep.
it would do us good to follow their lead. And I
Yep.
mean, especially taking into account that, I mean, look, so at this point, two things are gonna happen. Either this stays and enough people get immune to it, or enough people sadly suffer the consequences and pass away, that it kind of regulates itself out.
There
Or
it is.
we get a vaccine in place that will hopefully provide the necessary immunity to return life to a semi normal.
Yep. Exactly.
But
Like.
the other issue is that, of course, those two things that will one of those two things will happen before the other in all likelihood, because even if you do get vaccination, if even if you do get a vaccine in place, you're definitely not going to be able to vaccinate everyone, especially in the beginning, because it's going to be a
Mm-hmm.
huge distribution nightmare. I
Yes.
w- and taking and considering that the anti-vax movement has been flexing their Phil Heath and Arnold Schwarzenegger muscles these last years. COVID has definitely not helped. Well, it has helped them to prove their case. 5G, Bill Gates developed coronavirus,
Oh
et
my
cetera, et cetera.
fucking god, yeah.
So I really do think that it's going to be it's going to be an enormous challenge to get everybody vaccinated.
Yep.
And if the other thing happens before, so if it just stays and then it not necessarily burns itself out, but it does the rounds across the entire world. At this point, it's too soon to say what that will look like towards the end.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
I do believe with 100% certainty that it's not going to be pleasant, because health systems will become overrun, and we're going to be left scarred, bruised, and battered if we can
Yeah,
get out of
exactly.
it altogether.
Like, you can the analogy that I always tell, like, and remember, I'm no immunologist, I'm no virologist or whatever the hell it is, but common sense dictates that. And the analogy that I always keep telling people whenever I explain this is a virus is like a car. And in our case, it uses its fuel, us hosts, okay, in two ways, okay? Either it infects the host, okay, either it infects the host until the host eventually dies, all right? Or it infects the host long enough for the host to go on to another people. Thus, it'll have more fuel. Either way, either the host recuperates or the host dies. In both of those cases, the virus will not be able to infect more people. It's very hard to infect people if you're dead, and that is a very, I'd say, dark way of looking at it, but it is the harsh reality of things. And as you mentioned, it can either make its rounds and be immune or adapt to this new lifestyle. That can take a year, maybe even a few years to do, or
It'll take at
enough,
least a year
yeah, or enough
if we're
people
lucky.
will die and recover to the point where this can basically self-regulate, because nature
Die
always
and
has to find a
recover.
way to regulate.
That's
Yeah,
intense, bro.
die or
Die.
recover. Sorry, die or recover.
It's pretty nice if you could die and recover. I think.
You're in the
Yeah.
fucking coffin like, I'm back, bitches.
Yep. That's some old guard stuff right there. No, I
Yeah.
mean, I don't think. Yeah, that's a very good analogy. But the problem is that that analogy is oversimplistic in
Yep.
itself, because even if you do have the virus and you're asymptomatic, that's actually research has been more recent research shows that that's a huge problem, especially in people from a younger age group, specifically those between 20 to 29,
Mm-hmm.
because they don't show as many symptoms as people in older age groups, and consequently they're going to spread the virus around unknowingly. And I mean, you can't exactly blame them, because of course your natural instinct is to obviously take care of yourself if
Mm-hmm.
you see a
If you
reaction,
start
or
feeling sick.
if you start feeling sick. You're and but that's a clear cut example, because you are going to feel symptoms. But if you don't feel symptoms, it's extremely difficult for someone to it's conceptually, it's I think it will be difficult for someone to think, this can actually hurt me, because it'll probably do more damage to other people than to the person that's infected.
Mm.
So I mean, it's psychologically the effects of the virus now, without taking into account the whole social distancing thing. It's skewed all over the place, because it it's extremely difficult to track, because I think you're going to have to look at it not as an average or as a whole, based on the entire population. You literally have to go and break it down per age group, because
Mm.
the reaction you are getting in, let's say for example, I've seen cases firsthand in which older folks are shocked and take every precaution and then go above and beyond to limit their exposure and to just be overly hygienic as possible,
Mm-hmm.
which is in line with the recommendations, which is great. And on the other side of the spectrum, I've seen people with a complete and total disregard of any measures and of any advice from health experts. And it's hard, because there's a component there that we still haven't quite figured out yet from a behavioral change perspective. I think the natural response of most people is to form a sort of denial, in which
Yeah.
they reject the new norms that are being thrust upon them. And
Blissful ignorance, you could say.
I don't think it's ignorance. It's literally denial. Ignorant. I think ignorance is more you ignore the information and it doesn't get through to you at all. In this case, in with this type of denial, I think that they're perfectly aware of what is going on. It's just that they choose a defense mechanism or something that feels safe, or in their mind makes more sense.
Hmm. Because what is unknown is usually feared from people.
No, that's for everything. What is unknown is feared. I mean, we don't fear death because we're afraid to go to hell. We fear death because of the pain and because of the unknown, what happens after.
What happens after, and we don't really know what dying really feels. There are very few people who can literally say with confidence they know what dying feels like. Not like sleeping, but literally feeling your whole existence slip away. There are
Yeah,
very
that's
few people in the world that can actually confidently, with confidence, say they know exactly how that feels.
I think if we
And
get into that now, it's gonna take a couple of days before we're done.
oh yeah. Nah, but I think when it comes to what you're saying, it really comes down to a question of personal responsibility. For
That's
example, I
this
know
whole
many.
thing. It's personal responsibility,
Yes.
and I think as a species we've gotten lazy in the sense that we don't take any personal responsibility. But even before this, let's say for example, with climate change, everybody's blaming large corporations and governments and
Hmm.
and developing countries who have only now started to get luxuries that we've had for the past 50 years, for example.
Exactly.
Whereas
Yeah.
not a lot of people think about and reflect about the changes they themselves can make, and the impact is huge. I mean, yeah, this is where math and statistics come into play. That which I think is extremely important to get it to have at least a basic knowledge of, because it puts everything into a realistic perspective.
Hmm.
If You, for example, in the case of coronavirus, if you do social distancing correctly, limit your exposure and limit the contact with others, you might think, okay, I might have prevented something, some type of viral doom upon myself or someone else. But if 10 million people in the world do that, that's possibly 10 million lives saved, or not
Hmm.
even lives. That's 10 million hospital patients saved. Do you have any idea how big that impact is
Yeah.
on the healthcare system? That's a huge shift. So it's and individually, I don't think it really sinks in most people's
Mm.
brains that the effects aren't immediately clear to them, and consequently, of course, I think that's good because I don't know if if you've seen the movie Contagion, for example. By the way, I definitely recommend that movie, especially now. But please keep in mind it's an anecdote, nothing more. And
I
that
have not
film,
seen it, but I'll put it
well,
on the
yeah,
list.
and that film, pandemic is born from yeah, that's like a Majin Buu version of COVID-19, and yeah, that was really messed up. And we should honestly be thankful that we didn't get something like that, because that was a very, very bad. That was
Oh yeah.
so much worse than this. And in that movie, for example, you see the panic, and you see that movie was coincidentally they consulted a very famous, I think it was a virologist, who actually wrote a book and that would predict, like, will go on to predict pandemics like COVID. I can't remember his name right now, but
Mm.
in any case, so they consulted actual experts. Even though the virus in there is
It's like built to an
yeah,
extreme.
yeah, it's built to an extreme. You can see clearly that in the movie, for example, because the effects are much more immediate and much deadly compared to COVID, people tend to take it more seriously, and
Hmm.
that's sad, because for me, it doesn't have to reach that point, because if we've reached that point, that means we're already way too late. And
Yep.
honestly, we in a sense, on a positive note, I think we scored the lottery with COVID, because
Yes.
the impact is huge. I'm not going to underplay it at all. The impact is huge. The health consequences can be extremely dire,
Hmm.
but the lethality of it is not as bad as it could be. It could have been much worse. If you
Yes.
if you just take a look at what's out there and how many of the billions of viral combinations there can exist, yeah, it's we're relatively lucky
Yep.
now.
Imagine the symptoms becomes like as severe as TB, for example, as
Yeah, or
TB.
Ebola or
Oh,
something
oh
like
yeah.
so. Yeah,
Fucking hell. I don't know much about Ebola other than the fact that it gives people the overwhelming urge to go to the airport. That's it.
no, I think COVID gave people the overwhelming urge to go to the airport.
Oh yeah, nah, man. But look, there's this. Okay, there's this Greek proverb, "Matemata patemata." It means to learn through pain and suffering. And I genuinely believe that in a lot of stubborn people out there, they have to have something horrible happen to them. They have to have something. It could be losing and it could be getting the virus themselves, or it could be losing one of their family members to the viruses. And I think that's the only fucking way that'll open their eyes to the consequences of what they've been doing wrong, because some people, they know what they're doing is wrong, but they just choose not to care. They choose not to see the bigger picture.
Well, that has to do with how we're built, and
Mm.
I think evolution, from an evolutionary standpoint, we've always been a species who have reacted to events and or things occurring around us that have direct effects. Like, let's say, for
Mm.
example, you know that fire is hot, therefore you will not dance in it. You know that you're not supposed to eat certain types of fruit and or plants, because many of our ancestors did so before us, and many of them had to die for us to
Yep.
understand that, oh, okay, this is bad, we're not going to eat
Yeah.
it.
Some
So
some some
we're kind
fucking
of,
Homo sapien 10,000 years ago. Hey, Jeb ate the red plant. Jeb is dead. Don't eat the red plant.
yeah, exactly. So we're designed to learn from those experiences,
Mhm.
and that mindset hasn't exactly is not up to speed with what is expected of us these days with COVID.
Mm.
It's
Yes.
it's 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 the symptoms can be mild to severe, but most people don't even show symptoms, for example. So how are you going to process that? You are never going to process it as bad as, let's say, for example, experiencing the trenches in World War I, or the shock of almost drowning, or the fear of losing a loved one, in some freak accident. So naturally, I think the response, I'm not saying the response is good, but I am saying that I don't blame people. I do, however, I am strongly opposed to people not owning up to their choices. I do believe
Hmm.
that you have to take responsibility for your actions, and I'm just not seeing that in
Yep.
let's say in Aruba, for example, or even here in the Netherlands.
Oh, that I think
To
that's like it's a genuine human thing. It doesn't matter where you are. It might be slightly less worse in other countries, but so long as everyone's got a human brain, I think we're all guilty of that.
I think intelligence, for example, is a privilege, not a gift,
Hmm.
but some people just don't respect that privilege and they don't use it at all.
I
And
don't
that's
know.
always going to be the case. I mean, you can't. I mean, the only way I think you might try to eradicate that is if you try a similar technique to what Adolf Hitler did back in World War II. But I don't think
Oh,
many people will be
eesh.
on board with that.
Nope.
So yeah, no, that's not gonna. That's 2 out of 10. I'd not recommend that. But I mean, it's definitely something that it is a problem. And I just genuinely hope that people are gonna start taking this more seriously the more severe it becomes, because if you look at the statistics, and if you look at the graphs that various that are in place that track the scope of the virus, you see clearly mid March there's a huge spike, and then it gradually stays the same, and then with lows and highs, and then it's on average it stays it's in the same range, and then all of a sudden when we got cocky in June, it's just a massive tsunami of cases.
Yep.
So instead we were flattening the curve, but instead we kind of just like pushed it back a bit,
Yeah, I
and
think it's gonna. I can't remember what those types of graphs are called. The cosine graphs. I honestly think it's just gonna go up and down because what's gonna end up happening? Okay, people. Okay, there's gonna be the first. You're gonna have a wave of cases and death. Local governments and people will start to panic. Heavy restrictions will start putting in place, and those restrictions will work. It might take a few days, it might take a few weeks, but they will work. And what you'll eventually see,
yeah, we've
the
seen
number
that
of
those
cases.
restrictions work.
Yeah,
We've seen
you've
everywhere
seen
that
the
it works. Here
cases
in the
go
Netherlands,
down.
it worked. In the States, you can't really say because there never were any restrictions, but that's because
Yep.
they have a retarded Oompa Loompa leading them. That's very
Oh yeah.
sad, by the way.
The, the
And
yellow Oompa Loompa.
I mean, in Aruba too, you see that there was a fact. Although I do have to say, I believe that it was never completely eradicated from Aruba. We had
Nope.
a couple of cases that were asymptomatic all along, and now
Mm.
that the focus has been on taking extra precautions because the borders were reopened, you're gonna have increased testing. Of course, if you test more, you are going to find more cases. That's you can't argue with the
Yeah.
math.
Like
And
Aruba, right now we're the one that's giving out and that are giving out more test. We're one of the countries that are giving out more tests than any other place in the world right now, and that's a small
but
amount of
that's
it.
good. That's
Yeah, that
good.
is good.
I mean,
Okay.
it's a shame that a lot of people waited until now to get tested, because I mean, closing the borders, I don't know if that meant in some people's minds that, A, they closed the borders, that means we have a bubble around Aruba that protects us against COVID-19. It is the
Nope.
dome of life. I don't think if that was the direction most people were going
No,
towards
like they
when that
closed the
happened.
border
But
just to mitigate it from getting worse, just to mitigate it from getting worse.
and it
Because
did have an effect.
if it's low, yeah, it did have an effect. Because if it's local cases and you're sure that nobody else is coming in and out of the country, it's a lot easier to contain that way. But then you have another challenge. You need people to cooperate with you. Like I remember during the first few nights of the curfew, they were arresting anywhere between about 30 to 40 people per night. Like you need
Yeah,
people to yeah, and then they go out and blame the fucking government for this. No, to be honest, in this
honestly,
case, it is not the government's fault in this case. All right, it's not the government's fault you decided to go out. I
yeah,
mean, sure,
definitely.
like fucking all right, this is our fault, and instead of like taking responsibility for it, people will always try to find a scapegoat, and the common scapegoat for many people out there is, oh no, the government, they should have no, 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 like, hey, pendejo, like, you have a brain, you have some sense of I assume you have some sense of responsibility to stay your ass inside, don't go these places, okay? If you're coughing or whatever, fucking get tested or self isolate. Don't make it worse for yourself. But a lot of people just don't want to do that. What the hell? Yep.
No, but that's also because I think the response is pretty lax in the sense that if it were up to me, honestly, if it were up to me, and if I were the leader of a hypothetical country, or if I were the were law was a law or policy maker, I put heavy restrictions on those types of movements. I put that I hand out fines of 1,000 florins to people who misbehave or who don't respect the curfew. Even in the Netherlands now, for example, the fine it's a minimum of 90 euros and it averages out to 300-400. If it were up to me, it would be 10 times higher. Give the
Yep.
person 50 hours of community service afterwards.
Or go,
You have to
go
make yeah,
do
you
what the
have to make it. I mean, you don't have to form a dictatorship, but you have to
yep.
make it clear to people that this is not a joke. You
Yes.
have to take this seriously because the only way we will beat this is together. And
Mm.
not only from a health standpoint, it's extremely infuriating because as a health expert, it's very sad to see that science is so underappreciated now. We glorify TikTok idiots and sports superstars, which is great by the way. If you're good at a sport, if that's your skill, awesome. We
Yeah.
glorify them and adore them and pay them millions. And the starting salary, for example, of a junior researcher is uh, is next to nothing. So
Literally
how
one
do
tenth
we
of an NBA star.
no, I think it's 100th. Yeah, I'm not even
Oh,
joking. I
no.
think if it's
No.
100. So it's I mean, we live in a world and where the masses don't exactly have their priorities straight, and that's okay because that's also part of life. You have to figure not only your own life out, but you have to figure out life in general, what it
Mm.
is, what it means for you, what it can do for you. But we have to start taking this type of stuff seriously, and we have to give credit and we have to understand that the health experts and the experts in general that are doing this have our best interests at heart. It's not something to be taken lightly. So
Yep.
please take that into consideration. Please,
For
whenever you're opening the
for
door to
all of
step
you who are
out.
gonna fucking yeah, for all of you who are gonna fucking cry and fucking jump and cry and fucking beg for the bars to reopen so you can get your Palmera fix, okay? It's not gonna happen for now. Like to be honest, like we should. Oh, but like, have you seen what's been going on in Colombia, particularly Medellin and Cali and all those places? The Colombian cartels have taken shit into their own hands and started executing people who defied the curfew.
I think I read something about that. I mean, that's not exactly the way I would go about it, but it is
It is
their method
effective.
is their method is very absolute. That's to say the
So,
least. So
adapt or die.
yeah, I really, yeah, and in some ways, this is the mindset we need to take now because we have to adapt to the new way of life.
Exactly.
Um, it's definitely not going to be easy, but no adaptation ever is.
Mm.
But it's something that we have to do because the alternative is the is death, and
Yes.
I don't know about you or anybody else who's listening, but I'm not really a big fan of dying. I've never tried it before, and my intent is to hopefully not try it at all if possible. And if even if I do
Thank
try it,
you.
just try it once. Just try it once. And
Yeah,
this is
just for
not
funsies.
yeah, this is not something that's trial and error.
Nope.
It's pretty clear cut. So do practice your social distance. Be hygienic. Start washing hands because God knows before this pandemic, it's as if we discovered we discovered an alien race. It was so amazing for people to know. Oh my God, washing my hands, it helps.
Yes.
Obviously.
Oh my God, Swat.
So so
Oh my.
yeah, it's just I really hope it picks up. It
I
picks up
hope people
more in
who
the
the
more
people who
positive
take off
direction.
their shoes on airplanes and walk barefoot in the airplanes and learn their lesson now. Oh my God, I hate those.
Yeah, that's pretty nasty.
Oh well. Anyway, dude. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your 2 cents. Okay, Ernieson, everybody. Okay, you got anything to
Thanks for
plug? Anything to
having me.
promote?
Promote social distancing. Please, if you are doing social distance, use this time to reflect on your impact on not only this pandemic but on the world. And if you're stuck at home, if you've lost your job, if you've lost a loved one to this, please know that you are socially distant, but you were not alone. And with steadfast cooperation and with steadfast social distancing together but apart, different but same, not the same, we can and will get over this. It's the night is darkest just before the dawn, but historically we've gone through so much already, and we've always come through, from wars to being being this close. Like if you can see my fingers, it's like 1 billionth of a millimeter, this close to annihilating each other in nuclear fire. We can and will get over this too. We just have to work together and just do our part.
Amen to that, my dude. Anyway, thanks for having. Anyway, why am I saying thanks for having me? Okay, thanks for joining in the pod.
Thank you for
Damn.
having me, sir.
All right. Thanks for joining up the podcast. Anyway, guys, I hope you guys enjoyed. This is Stan the Man signing off.